Michael Eric Dyson joining us this morning. Michael, so good to have you. We appreciate your time. And I want to ask you, what did the NBA players accomplish with these boycotts?
I mean, so much. First of all, it's great to be here always with you, Jenny, and Skip and Shannon. The reality is they accumulated visible capital, the capital of attention. We live in a political economy of attention. So much is grabbing for our attention. We're on the social media. We're on television. We are constantly 24 hours watching your show on repeat. But the reality is that they broke through this iron cage, airtight air cage of media to deliver a message. We are not going with business as usual. This is so significant that we must interrupt business as usual. We must make a point that something is more important than multi-billionaires who own the NBA as the team owners. Something more important than the playoffs, which are incredibly dramatic, with Luka emerging as a star and LeBron playing out of his mind for a man 35 and above. What's more important is the fact that Black people are dying in the streets. What's more important is that we must leverage our political capital, our political attention to a serious matter, and interrupt business as usual and say that this is of paramount importance. Doc Rivers crying on television, Troy Vincent on radio and television doing the same thing. Two men of esteem, august, solid, solemn gentlemen who are not easily given over to every whim and caprice, every emotional wind to blow. These men have been unmoored, have been uprooted from their usual stance of holding a face of stoicism in the face of American tragedy and carnage, and have now said enough is enough. So the NBA players and the Major League Baseball players and the National Football League players and belatedly the National Hockey League players have done something extraordinary. They have come together. They have forged a compact. Yes, it is ad hoc. Yes, it is spontaneous, but it has had a tremendous effect in terms of seizing the authority away from those who would be negative and divisive and saying, we have something to say. We will not shut up and dribble or toss a pigskin or hit a baseball or hit a black puck, but we will do something more important. We will show our humanity, and we will show that we are no different than any other person out here, especially a Black person, a man or woman. The WNBA especially doing an incredible job of dramatizing this plight and predicament. So I'm so proud of how they have handled themselves, and that's what they've achieved.
Doc, if you don't mind me asking, what should the athletes, and since we're talking about all platforms, what should the NBA players, what should the MLB players, what should the NFL players, WNBA players, what should they demand of their owners that they do now moving forward?
That's a great question. And I think that when we've heard that they're asking the owners of the NBA teams, don't just rest on your laurels. You're getting love just for not being the owners of the NFL. Ain't much. That's a low bar. Oh, you mean we're not conservative to a degree that we are indifferent to the plight and predicament of Black people, or like Major League Soccer with one of the major figures there saying some horrendous things? The reality is that they've got a low bar, but you got to do more than that. You can't just be nice. You got to be effective. You can't just be interested in the future of African-American people. After all, you employ a great degree of them, and your product is their body. What they must demand of them is to use and leverage their authority as owners. You know, Brother Mark in Dallas, Brother Michael in Charlotte, and many of the tremendous owners in Philadelphia, you got to, and they've done an extraordinary job of criminal justice reform. Look at what has gone on in Philadelphia. An owner of a team, or a partner, I think as they're now calling themselves, can say to the criminal justice system, what you're doing is wrong. You must have prosecutors who are concerned about calling a grand jury in the cases where Black people are dead or die at the hands of police. And if not, we've got to vote you out of office. Talk to some of your friends. I think about that line from The Godfather when they met Godfather 1 when they met around the table. And they said the Godfather must share so many of those politicians that he collects as so many trinkets. Yes. Well, you do the same thing as an owner of an NBA team. You got connection. So now all your bragging has to be brought to bear. Oh, yeah, we got politicians. We got political figures. We got billionaires. Then use your effective relationships with them to demand police reform, to demand an end to qualified immunity. Now, you can't wave a wand and do that, but raise your voice. Can you imagine if the owners of the NBA would come out and say, these are some specific things we have to fight, stand your ground laws in 20 states that essentially arm white men overwhelmingly with guns to be able to kill black people with the Castle Doctrine? These young men and women have become specific and particular. Now it's up to the owners to own up to their responsibility of finding simpatico with these black men and women and these Latinx men and women and these European and white brothers and sisters, and find a way to speak to the issues that need to be addressed.
So, Dr. Dyson, as usual, I appreciate the power of your words.
Thank you,
My
sir.
question for you is this. Did the NBA players go far enough in your estimation? Did they wield enough of their power? Should they have boycotted longer? Should they have gone to the nth degree and said, no more playoffs, we're done for this season? Did they go far enough to make enough statement? And yet it's conflicting for me because they still have the bubble. They still have their platform. They have now walked away from it briefly, and they're back on their platform, and they can speak out from that platform. So which did they go far enough in your opinion?
I think they absolutely did. Look, they're living in the real world, right? When we talk about realpolitik, the real world, this is the real deal. And when you leverage your authority, you have to do so within the context of the structures that you have to abide by. Robert Frost, the great poet, said, freedom is moving easy in a harness. You do have a harness, but you're moving easy in the harness. Yep. And when you think about that old story, you got a chicken and a pig having a conversation. Hey, let's both make a contribution for breakfast. Oh, okay. The chicken, what do you have to do? I have to give up an egg. What does the pig have to do? You got to give up your behind. You got to die in order to make breakfast, right? So are you a pig or are you a chicken? And so the reality is that the players understood. The owners do have options. We can cut y'all out. We can suspend the CBA. We can make it hard on you, force majeure, right? They can, all kind of Latin terms they could deploy to jack things up. Now, this is owners. These are owners who claim to be ostensibly committed to the same interests of those players, but they also have their bottom line. So you got to understand what the bottom line is. But the beautiful thing about the Clippers and the Lakers, we're willing to shut it down. That sent a signal that I don't care how much money you got. I don't care what you're doing. If you're going to be in league with Muhammad Ali, did Muhammad Ali not give it all up? Yep. As did he not sacrifice the entire livelihood that he had in order to make a bigger statement? Now, thank God they didn't have to do this, but I think they went far enough in this sense. The players, and I know Shannon has made this point before, and so have you, Skip, and the wonderful Jenny, the players now have to forge connection with other groups who do this for a living, right? They ain't professional social activists. They use their platform to leverage their authority, but they should also make visible African-American Policy Forum with Kimberly Crenshaw, Judith Brown Dennis, with her tremendous group. Think about Sherilyn Ifill with the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP. Think about the NAACP. Think about the National Urban League. Think about National Action Network, which is, as we speak, holding a march in Washington, D.C. with the Reverend Al Sharpton. There are groups that do this. They are the LeBron Jameses of their organization. They are the Candace Parkers of their organization. If we can now bring together those athletes with those tremendous figures who do this for a living, that would be an extraordinary marriage that allows their message to carry forward. So yes, I think what they did, this is a race. They carried the baton the first length. They got out in front. Now they're handing the baton off to others. Now they're still in the race, They're still competing in the larger games. They will do what they have to do, but they need partners. And those partners have to be those organizations and leaders at grassroots and organized leaders among the elite who have been doing this for quite some time.
Doc, you know, we go back and forth, and I've heard a lot of people, and I know and you and I have talked about this, with the people that say, well, they need to stop protesting and doing because protest doesn't work. But I don't think people realize that protest does work for the simple fact that there's a lot of legislation that have been enacted that was a direct reflection of because of the protests. And the Justice Department said the greatest singular legislation ever enacted was the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which was brought out by a protest on the march from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights because they were being disenfranchised.
You're dropping more science than Einstein on here, brother. There's no question. And look, somebody tell Bruce Arians, love you. Glad you got my man Tom Brady, the GOAT. So don't be messing with my man, the GOAT down there. Just get him right now. Get him some receivers. You got them, right? Don't do the Aaron Rodgers where you just jack him up, hire Jordan Love, ain't got no weapons, all right? So let me just get my bid in for my man Tom Brady. But Bruce, where you at, Bruce? Just because you had an experience as a white guy in 1968 where you saw some protests and it didn't turn out that way, then give up your white privilege, Bruce. Yeah. Then give up your white privilege, Bruce. If it doesn't work, what are you willing to do for it, Bruce? Don't blame the people that you think are ineffectively protesting. Surrender your white privilege. And by surrendering your white privilege, put in place a black head coach right now, Bruce. Forget protests. Be substantive. Now, we know we ain't going to do it. And I ain't mad at you, Bruce. I'm just being rhetorical. But I'm saying slow down with what you're saying. It's sloppy. It's imprecise. Protest is huge. There was a protest in 1776. I don't know if y'all heard about it.
Yeah.
But they were mad at some people, and they threw some tea into the river.
In the harbor.
And then they protested, and the protest led to a nation. My God. They were protesting the unjust treatment by the British. And now America was born. You claim, Bruce, I think, that it's the greatest nation in the world. Protest birthed it, sir. That's like saying, I'm proud to be the son of my mama, but we don't need mamas. We don't need mothers in order to be born. We just need test tubes. Come on, sir, stop. The reality is protest, as you said, has led to tremendous results. Martin Luther King Jr., 1963, along with tremendous Fred Shuttlesworth, Diane Nash, James Bevel, fighting. What happened? 1964, the Civil Rights Act. As you said, 1965, John Lewis and many others involved, Amelia Pointer, right? When you think about the fact that the Civil Rights Bill passed in 64, the Voting Rights in 1965, the Fair Housing Act in 1968, protest is incredibly important. It's strategic. It's directed. How do we know it's important? How do we know it's effective? You got mad at Colin Kaepernick for protesting. 4 years later, more of your football players understand what he was trying to do then than understood it, now than understood it then. And they're a result of what he did. So, Mr. Arians and others who say protests ain't important, you just mad because it is important. It's so important that a young 17-year-old boy in Kenosha shot 2 protesters and murdered them in cold blood. Because protest is extremely important, extremely impactful, and has consequences that continue to reverberate. So for those who say that, I just say pick up a book, study your history, and know what you're talking about.
Doc, can I ask you a question? We put people in office. That's what the politicians are for. That's what Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Tim Scott, that's what they're there for. And then we have the local level. Why do we demand, why do we ask so much from our athletes that our politicians who say they take an oath and say this is what we're about, this is what we want to do, but we seem to get more and ask more from our athletes than we do our politicians?
Now, this is where Bruce Arians may be relevant. Remove one P word, protest, and put politicians in there. I ain't saying they ain't doing their job, but some of them ain't doing their job, or they're doing it effectively in the wrong direction. The reality is that the reason it falls upon us, because nobody will fight for you as much as you will. Shannon, when it comes time for you to renegotiate your contract, Skip loves you. Jenny loves you, but you got to speak for yourself. And if you don't speak up for yourself, you're not going to get the kind of contract you know you need and deserve. So the reality is that we can't depend on politicians. In fact, protests led to politicians. Without the protests, the politicians wouldn't exist. Many of them wouldn't even be in office. So we realize that, yes, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, and all these other figures should be doing what they're doing, and it is their responsibility. But it's our responsibility to hold their feet to the fire. It's our responsibility to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And we can never reduce the complexity of what we need, the nuance of what we need, to a political office. Politicians cannot ultimately deliver a change of mind, of soul, of heart that is critical to fighting anti-blackness, that is critical to fomenting anti-racism in America. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. said, the law can't make you love me, but it can stop you from lynching me. So I'm not saying the law is not critical. I'm not saying the law is not important. But at the end of the day, nobody will fight for us. When we see LeBron James and Troy Vincent and Candace Parker and Miss Ogunike and so many others who are out there representing those WNBA players, black women always leading the way, ain't they? Got gunshots on they backs. I know it's their backs. On they backs with the exact spaces where Mr. Blake was shot and his name spelled out on their shirts and pushing for legislation. This is what is critical. We can never depend upon politicians to represent our interests, but we have to appeal to them to make certain that they continue to articulate the noble aspirations for which we hired them in the first place.
So, Doc, sum this up for us. Speaking of all the protests, all that we saw in the wake of the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, all the black people and the white people who turned out to protest, do you sense that we experienced any racial progress in this country to this point?
That's a great question. And look at it in précis. Look at it in short form. We said about George Floyd, oh my God, things are different. This is a new day. And I don't doubt that, because I think in many ways it is truly the case. We didn't have news people from all over the world when Eric Garner died to the same degree. And he died from the same malady. I can't breathe. A cop choking his airways, asphyxiating him. And now we get the predictable posthumous demonization of Mr. Floyd. He had enough fentanyl in his body. I don't care what he had in his body, methamphetamine or fentanyl. It didn't kill him. He was still breathing when you came. The homicide was the direct result of Mr. Chauvin, former cop Chauvin, putting his knee on his neck, right? So the reality is that, yes, it is extremely important for us to talk about, the issues at play here. But when we speak about who is responsible ultimately and who is culpable, then we've got to speak about the issues that are before us. And yes, there was a tremendous change with George Floyd. But look at what happened. Not what was that, May 25th? And we're in August? And then another black man is killed? And then shot in the back? And then this is what you think. Do you cops even have common sense? Somebody's watching you. You're going to be put on camera. You probably will get fired, but this is what they know. It doesn't make a difference. I have qualified immunity. The people who are the prosecutors most likely will not hold me accountable. And I will literally get away with murder. The difference now is that we are not taking it lying down like Mr. Floyd, literally. He took it, they thought by Mr. Floyd being prostrate on the ground that we're going to take it lying down. No, we won't. We will rise up. And as you said, Latinx people, white brothers and sisters, putting their bodies on the line. The two protesters who were killed the other night were white.
Yep.
Right? Mr. Viola Luito in 1965 from Detroit, Michigan, who was leaving the march, murdered by racist bigots. Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, white woman on the front line. This is what allyship looks like when black bodies are not the only bodies dying. Because when white bodies begin to accumulate in the death toll here, something different will happen. Look at the way in which even the racist police force in Kenosha, and yes, I said that, tried to justify this young man by saying the reason the killing happened is because the curfew was violated.
Right.
Are you that crass and craven? Are you that indifferent to the rule of law that after a certain time it's legitimate to explain and justify an act of murder? This is what we're dealing with. And by the way, I know people are quick to rush, all the cops ain't bad. Show it. Prove it. You know, that argument can no longer work. Because when you meet the wrong cop who kills you, all the good cops in the world are not there to save you. And let me tell you something why cops may not be as good as we say they are. Where are the good ones speaking up? This is wrong. We disagree with this. This is a contravention of our own convention. This is the rule of law that is being subverted here. Where are the, quote, good cops? The system itself is sick. It is not just one bad apple. The bad apple is falling from a perverted tree. The tree has to be chopped down. The good cops that come through, and there are plenty of them, are set in a system that is itself defective. This is why defunding the police is critical. That doesn't mean we get rid of cops. That means we reassign them. That means that when we have a mental health issue and crisis going on, why are you sending an armed spokesman for the state as opposed to a person who is a mental health advocate who can address them? So my point is, we've got to have more than a few bad apples from the tree. We got to cut the tree down, and we've got to ask why it's so perverted in the first place. Then those good cops can be reassigned in public safety to make certain that we are protected and served as they are supposed to do.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here to get the latest from the show, and be sure to check out more of the best clips from Undisputed, or go watch a few other segments from our other shows on FS1.